found this table at a garage sale. The finish was in pretty bad shape, and the worst spots were these light spots in the front where the finish was completely gone. But it was only $5, so I picked it up to refinish. When you have a step table like this, sometimes it's easier to disassemble it before stripping it, so you have easier access. So on this one, I decided just to remove the upper shelf, and I took a heat gun and applied some heat to the joint on both sides, and then took a rubber mallet and just pounded the joint open, and it came apart pretty easily. I decided to leave the vertical pieces in just because they were in very solidly, and I didn't want to disturb the joint. It just didn't seem worth it. Once I had the top shelf off, I began the stripping process, and as I usually do, I use citrus strip and just brush it on, put a nice coat on there, keep it wet until the finish starts to loosen, and then I just scrape it off with a scraper. And then I took some mineral spirits and 4/0 steel wool and just went over the whole tabletop and the sides and just removed any of the residue from the stripper. When the tabletop had dried, I could see that those spots where the finish was missing were still visible. And when I wet them down with mineral spirits, they turned into dark spots. So I knew I had to remove those before I put the finish on. And the first thing I tried to remove them was sanding. I used an orbital sander, first with 120 grit sandpaper, and then I went to 150 grit, and then I finished by hand with 180 grit, just to remove any swirl marks that may have been left by the orbital sander. And I also sanded the vertical portions entirely by hand. I didn't want to use the orbital sander on there because it just would have been too hard to control it and keep it flat on the vertical surface. And the sanding did the trick. It took out the spots. You could maybe see one or two of them very faintly, but I knew once the finish went on and the stain went on, it wouldn't be visible at all. There was a small ding on the front of the table, and it was right on the edge. It wasn't very deep, but I wanted to fix it before I put the finish on. And to do this, I used quick wood, which is a epoxy wood filler. And it comes in a tube, and you just slice off however much you think you'll need. And it's two parts, so you just mix it together. You can knead it together with your fingers until it's evenly combined. And then you apply it to wherever you're trying to fix. I found that it helps if you wet your finger a little bit and then just smooth it out as best you can. I like to remove as much excess filler as I can before it hardens, but you can leave it a little bit proud, and then once it does harden, you can go back with sandpaper and clean it up. So the epoxy has now hardened, and I'm just smoothing it up with some sandpaper. The filler doesn't have much color in it, and it doesn't take stain well or at all. So here I'm coloring it a bit with some amber shellac with some trans tint walnut colored dye mixed in. And this is going to get close, and then once I put the stain on and the finish, it'll blend in nicely. I decided to put the shelf back on before I put the stain on, just because I didn't want to get any glue onto the stain. So here I'm just cleaning up the dowels, getting the old glue off, and just getting it ready to re-glue. So the dowels were cleaned up and the dowel holes were cleaned up, and then the shelf went back in pretty easily with glue, and I just clamped it up. Once the glue had dried, I applied the stain, and here I'm using General Finishes Antique Walnut, and this is gel stain. I like using gel stain when refinishing old furniture, when there are imperfections in the wood that you couldn't get out, and the gel stain just helps to blend everything together and hide minor imperfections. And I don't leave the gel stain on for very long. Once I get it on there, then I just wipe it off right away. The legs on this table just screwed on and off, so they came off really easily. And they weren't in very bad shape, they just had some scratches, some nicks, so I just went over them with the gel stain, and it cleaned it up nicely. For the top coat on this, I used satin wipe-on polyurethane, and I just mixed up my own with some regular satin polyurethane and mixed it half and half with mineral spirits. And that just thins it nicely and makes it easy to wipe on, and it doesn't leave marks. No brush marks, of course, because you're just wiping it on. And I probably put on about 3 or 4 coats. And here it is, all done. And I think it came out nicely. Thanks for watching.